let's get right to it. So, what do you mean by showing versus telling? One of the major things, I guess, in a most like logical way I can put this to you is info dumping, and Gray is a like major violator of this one. I'm learning as my writing is starting to take hold, but you have to trust the reader for context clues. Context clues you have to leave behind for the reader. So make sure that you place some trust and faith in the reader because chances are they've read a lot of books. If you know, it's one of those things where I want to put things in there that's, tell the reader exactly the situation. And instead of putting something in there to the effect of, Celeste is angry, that's like telling the reader the character's emotion. Instead of telling the reader that Celeste is angry, we can do other things. Say in the midst of, let's put John in there, because John is Celeste's beau, right? Her bae. And he walks in and he says something to the effect of, I have to leave today. And then we have like some kind of text below that where it's, essentially Celeste pauses. Like she pauses, her shoulders tense. She slams down her glass. Ooh, I just caused the camera to move. Ooh, fancy. So she slams down the glass. Her shoulders are tense. She just stares at him. She puts her hand on her hip. Like telling the reader these things without outwardly saying that, or you can use dialogue, right? And this is still a bit of exposition, which means just telling things as they are, info dumpy, right? Instead of just, telling the reader, you can show them. You can say, yeah, and you don't do this. This is another major thing that new writers do. New writers like to write shouting in all caps. You can do that, but you can also write the dialogue and then next to it, Celeste shouted, or something like that. And that just lets the reader know, or maybe you can build up her body language before she goes into dialogue, like her shoulders tense, she slams down the glass. Maybe you can italicize it instead of capping it, like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, and it's italicized. Some people still use italicized font for inner monologue, and I do that because I kind of like to separate inner monologue from normal like sentences, and you can do either is correct. I just like it because it differentiates it from the normal narrative that people read. A lot of times people love to info dump during action scenes, and this is like a big no-no. Hey Fortnite, hey Nafto and Rathborn, welcome guys. You snuck in on me. How's it going? So in action scenes, sometimes you can tell the reader too much from the main character's perspective. That main character, especially in an action scene, needs to be surprised. So if your main character gets thrown into an action, like, they hear gravel, or they hear like a shoe scuff against the gravel, which makes them like start because they're by themselves, or so they thought. They turn around, and you can do the inner monologue of what was that or something, and then when you turn around, that's when you're going to start diving into action because the main character is unaware of what's going on, and a lot of new writers like to just spell that out for everybody that's reading this section. Like Celeste spun around. She looked into the parking lot. There was no one there before, but now there is, and she did, and she doesn't know what to do. And you just start like drifting off into this script-like silliness. And no, don't do that. The correct way to handle this situation is to throw the reader into it because they know as much as the main character does that's getting attacked. So the main character is not going to sit there and be thinking about this. This is an action that the main character is going through. And we know from, human psychology that people don't really think about things in action situations. You might know like senses, so you can engage senses with your reader, like there's a smell that you notice or a sound you hear, like the crunching of gravel or a gun, trigger, not a gun trigger, the hammer, the cocking of the gun, right? Or, you can hear stuff like that. Like engage their senses instead in action so that they are there with the main character. So this is a major thing that a lot of, oh, Octavia's back. Hey, Octavia. This is a major thing that a lot of writers initially struggle through. Let's take a look at Octavia's paragraph. Let's see. I haven't read enough books to verify that. Personally, that statement doesn't make sense. Do people really do that? If you're doing an action scene, you think exposition would be cut down further than usual to get a quick pacing. Yeah, exactly. You want a quick pacing style layout for action scenes. And I've read a lot of boring action scenes where people like spell out every single move, or, I've like, guys are huge offenders of this, and I don't mean to single you out, but in all my writing courses, guys liked to break down different sort of weapons and battle moves and techniques that they did, that it was just like, I don't want to read about this. I just want to read about the action, like what happens. Yeah, you can talk about dodge and parry, and you can talk about blocking or getting hit and any number of injuries that happen. That's awesome. But don't spell it out for me. Yeah, exactly. We don't have to have like action for action kind of spelled out for the reader, we can talk about certain things. Maybe there is a part in the action that you want to slow down, and you can slow that down with dialogue. Like, I stood behind my empress, her sword gleaming in the morning light. You talk about the dewdrop that slides down the blade as the tension rises in the air. Like, these sort of things are okay, and it's called pacing. You want to build the drama, build up to that point of action before all hell goes loose and people just from both sides are just on each other. And it's made for tension building and slowing down the action. Maybe there is a break in the action. Something unexpected happens. Maybe from the other side, you're both coming head on, and then all of a sudden, that was a fake out move, right? All of a sudden your side gets flanked, or they come in and they funnel you from the tops. And then that's your point where the main character like has that aha moment, or that main character is like, oh my God, we've been tricked. Like, we were led to believe that this was going to be a straightforward battle. They've foiled us. They've used such and such technique. You can do that effect, or you can just basically be just as confused as the main character because you have no idea what the hell just happened. It's about what you do with it. Yeah. Yeah, none of those things are Wait, what? I have no idea what you mean. None of those things are dialogue? The battle was going on in their favor until Shrek arrived. Yeah, exactly. I think it could go either way, Octavia, because I've read both styles that are very successful. It really depends on the author. Some authors that I've read, they can be a little bit literal with action, but they do it in a way that keeps me excited. Like, I don't have to know every single motion. But occasionally I'll read something where like, oh, I didn't know about that technique in battle. That's actually kind of interesting. I like that. And maybe things that only a general would know, like the general knows about certain formations and they might talk about it after they've been captured. I think that'd be great. But in the heat of the moment, your characters are not going to be concerned with that. They're going to be concerned with the fact that their entire, like half their army gets murdered and they're now imprisoned or enslaved or something like that. Like, that's the thing you want to focus on in the beginning. And then you have time to reflect for the main character, and the main character can go, what did I do wrong here? And then they have like moments of agonizing over what they could or could not have done, because that's very human. That's extremely human to reflect on something like that. Dialogue is a good way to express someone's emotion. And, like I said, you don't want to write in all caps if someone's shouting. Although now in more modern writing, you can write in all caps, but to me, and it might just be personal preference, it seems a little unprofessional to do that, like write in all caps in a story. And I have seen people do that. But personally, I kind of like the italicized for either inner monologue or shouting, or you just put in the next sentence or the sentence that comes before that dialogue that they're shouting. Like I said, spell it out with body language, like they tense. The glass shatters on the floor, like maybe that's surprise instead of Celeste is surprised. Celeste is angry. John is angry. That made Celeste upset. Like these are wah, 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 wah. That's like so boring. Don't do that. But yeah, it basically all goes back to avoid info dumping. Nobody likes that, which, as I mentioned earlier, Grey is a big offender on certain things. She's getting better. I just reworked half the book last night and the day before, so excited about it. I just got it back from my editor, so now I get to go through and pour over that and see what's going on. So being brief, don't info dump, and now this last one's controversial. Cliches work. Cliches work for a reason. You can use cliches sometimes. It's okay. However, try to steer clear of too many types of cliches. Like, for instance, in the beginning of Hell's Gate, my cliche I use is the main character wakes up from a dream. That doesn't always work. So people don't want to read that every single time. It's kind of an old, tired cliche. But there's also successful stories. George R.R. Martin used tons of cliches, but his writing works because it's good. Good writing is good. End all be all. And again, I've mentioned this before, but if you can envision this in a movie when you're writing, you're doing good because you want to think about the pacing in film. Literature pacing is the same in film pacing. Get your pacing down right. Action versus, there's dialogue, there's scene setting, there's all kinds of things. You want to pull your readers along for the ride, whether you want them to speed along, it's really fast, or slow it down. Like all of a sudden it's revealed to Celeste that she is some sort of major god or goddess or deity. Like, oh, bom, 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 danger. Those sorts of things. Dragon donkeys? What did I come back to? Yeah, with a character waking up. Yeah, good writing is good writing. Oh, I've read plenty of stories where I was like, the beginning of the story was a character waking up, and I was like, this is dumb. But then I read about halfway through the first chapter, and I was like, okay, I can get past that. And I started my my main Hell's Gate with that one as well. But honestly, I tried to make it as interesting as possible in that beginning part. I wanted the reader to question whether she was awake or she wasn't awake. And I just had fun with it, Yeah. Yeah, exactly. There's a little bit more to it than that, Nafto. But yeah, you want to, by speeding up the pace, it's shorter sentences, and also when you're slowing down a pace for a reader, typically you're describing more in the scene, or you're describing more about what's going on. In action, the main character doesn't have time for that because too much is going on. So yeah, it's that fast pace, shorter sentences, very concise, take out the fluff, basically. Exactly. Well, yeah, she's waking up to something that you're not sure what it is, and I wanted to add a lot of supernatural elements in the story, since that's exactly what this story is about. I want to say it's similar to slipstream fiction, where I was taking modern events, like modern day events, and adding the supernatural elements in there. There's another word for it. I guess it's kind of considered dark fantasy too, which I think is slightly more modern genre. If I'm wrong, correct me, but I think it is a more modern genre. But people could argue that it's slipstream because of Lovecraftian type elements in certain stories that they call slipstream. Yeah, you don't want to say a character is tall, angry, cold, tired. Sometimes you can use words to describe tired. You know, you don't have to use like every sentence doesn't have to be special. You could say words like Celeste felt exhausted, or something similar. One of my teachers gave a really great speech, and she said too many new writers are taught to be like really fancy and outlandish with their words, when sometimes it's okay to be simple with expressing how the main character feels. You don't have to do that all the time, but if you're building up a very specific scene for people, you want to have the vernacular there, right? Something that really builds something special for the reader. So we talked about sensory detail. That's really important with showing versus telling. You don't have to outright say how the characters are feeling. You don't even have to use dialogue in certain scenes. If you can just describe body language and sensory detail and facial expressions and this, you can use so many different elements to show the reader versus telling, because those context clues, the readers are going to pick them up instantly because you're taking time out to write that down in the story. And so the reader's going to hone in on that. Why did we pay attention to the fact that their, hands turn ghost white, meaning like they're gripping the steering wheel or the table or whatever. Like you can see their knuckles through their skin. That's usually like holding back its anger, its frustration, like, that sort of thing. There's so many different ways you can really engage your reader to show versus telling. Cassandra was angry. Celeste was sad. Another thing to be careful of that new writers like to use is they like to use text messages, or they're on the phone. So we kind of info dump on the phone. Like if you're talking on the phone with another character and you're kind of like laying it out, maybe instead the character gets off the phone and they hang up, and through like their emotional responses and their body language, it wasn't good. There's just, or sending an email, like, what was it? I read 50 Shades of Grey, the first book, for research. I never wanted to pick up that piece of crap because I've read sections through some of my friends who were excited and they lended the book to me, and I was like, this is crap. I don't like it. But this is exactly what comes up when I think of this, because it's like the email thing, the info dumping email between Grey and her, where they like exchange emails and stuff. I'm like, this is so freaking boring. Like, try not to do that. You can do it occasionally, but that definitely is the mark of a new writer. Yeah, see, and some worlds, like if a cell phone doesn't exist in it, like if you're a fantasy writer or, something where maybe that technology doesn't exist in your story, you have to come up with different ways. Like, how would they know? It would be awkward to exposit information through long waiting periods of crow messages. Yeah, I guess you just have to find out through messengers back then, wouldn't you? That would be a thing. That would definitely be a thing. Metaphors. You have to be careful with too many metaphors. I've read some stories where they've just piled metaphors in there, and I'm like, please don't. I mean, yeah, it's a good way to avoid telling writing, but you have to be careful with how often you use them. A good metaphor, like there's no exact formula to it, but I've read stories where a few chapters in, they have like a metaphor in there that kind of relates back to the first book I read on it, and it works so perfectly with that scene. And sometimes it's really hard to explain how to properly use metaphors to people. Maybe it relates to a fable you read about earlier in the story, and now that fable somehow relates to the main character's life. Like the main character now understands that fable their parent told them. I'm reading The Rising Sun, which is book 2 in Red Rising, the Red Rising series. I think his name is Pierce Brown. And I freaking love his storytelling style. He is amazing. And also we talked about being specific, don't be vague. I always try to talk about that in every session we have. Be concise. That basically sets it up to where you aren't being repetitive, you aren't info dumping. It is just straight and to the point, especially with action. Oh yeah, and I guess another thing is, ultimately your goal as a writer is to engage the individual. So as I mentioned before, I like to use the movie, I guess, analogy, because if it interests you in a film and you see how action works in a film, it's going to work that way for your writing. And you notice in film, the audience knows about as much as the main character does, and that's how they're successful at portraying that action to you as a viewer. It's the same in writing. I think the most important thing with showing your audience with a writing is it's like painting a picture for their mind's eye. It's this beautiful scene that you take all these different elements and you put them together for that viewer, and you're just engaging them in every way possible. And like for me, I love writing action scenes, and I love slowing down certain moments in my stories for readers where they're like, I don't know why she's paid so much attention to detail in this one chapter, but then later they come to understand why. And that's so much fun as a writer to be able to do that. It's one of my favorite things, engaging all the senses. Yeah, well, they have a lot more visual cues, whereas in literature you have to talk about those cues because we're very visual creatures. So in movies, we can take a look at the tone in the main character's voice, facial expressions, micro expressions, all those things that we see, that we pay attention to, that our brains naturally see. So in books, the key to that is being able to describe that but not overdo it. And that's the balance in books versus film. So those are the key things to keep in mind when you are trying to show the reader versus tell the reader. So hopefully this has helped you guys out today. I haven't seen any new questions. I haven't seen any comments or anything, so I think everybody is good to go on this topic. And I feel like I repeated myself a little bit since we started. So I'm going to go ahead and call it for today, and then we're going to jump on a game about 2 p.m. today. I'm jumping on just a little bit later. All right, you guys, thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to be back on at 2 o'clock, and we'll start getting some gaming stuff underway. Thank you so much for joining me again, and I will see you for our next writer's workshop next Wednesday, and I'll go ahead and set it up to where hopefully we can have some people send in their short stories or flash fiction, or we'll have kind of a general spot that we can go over it. And that would be fantastic because we could pull that up in stream and each person could kind of have a day dedicated. Like we could do some dedicated workshop days for that. And since Octavia is really fantastic, because Octavia is an editor, she can help. And I can help as well with it, my many years of experience in writing and things that Gray has done wrong. Of course, Nafto. You guys take care. Have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, and I'll see you soon. Bye, guys.